Pat was born in Portlaoise and lives now in Dublin. He's published over a dozen books of poetry and prose, and it's very exciting. His book, Then Again, was just released a week ago, so we're the first audience to experience it. He's also decorated with many awards. He's a member of Aosdána, and he's won the Patrick Kavanagh Prize and the Boran Hennessy Prize. And there's a lot of connections between our two readers. It's wonderful. I was sort of brought to mind that there's an American poet, Gregory Orr, and he writes a lot about poetry as survival. And these two collections really seem to link into the craft of just being alive as well as being alive as a writer. There's a poem, Rudolph, which is for Clean and Reardon, and just this is the gorgeous line break in it. There's always, when we look for it, another life, or a hint of it at least, and I think that runs through Pat's collection. I'm so bombarded by the present right now. There's this poem, Arena, which says history is a long time ago, and there's all these challenges to the reader throughout his new collection. And after Pat, Jessica is going to read. I think both of these readers are constantly playing with certainty and uncertainty, and that's really honest, because I think we're always kind of looking for answers. So with Jessica, she's from Dublin, and she's worked as a dramaturg. She's worked with the Abbey as well, and her debut collection was with Dedalus, Liffey Swim. She's received many awards as well. So she's received the Ireland Chair of Poetry, Bursary, and she was telling me about a Poetry Ireland commission that she worked on with the choir. And she also is starting to write a libretto, which is very exciting. Her collection came out last year, The Quick, and there's gorgeous references throughout to, again, sort of what we're stuck with, or what we're born with. The sickle of your DNA is from the titular poem, and what we kind of go after. And this beautiful line, we're built to stagger on, and I think that these poets both do a lot more than stagger on. They're exceptional. So I hope you enjoy the reading and our discussion afterwards. And their books are on sale, and their previous books as well. So they'll be on sale at the break. So thank you.
Thanks a million, Sarah. Thanks a million to Pat and to everybody involved, especially the volunteers in this festival, which I've attended on a number of occasions, not enough, but haven't been at one stage involved in the then Dublin Writers' Festival. I know the pressures of just putting a show on the boards, but doing it repeatedly, and then doing it repeatedly in successive years shows a real failure of character, Pat. And thanks to the Arts Council, and particularly to Sarah Byrne, who's here this evening and today at a number of events, to Cork City Council and all the various funders and enablers and abettors. I have a terrible habit of never knowing what to read, and sometimes it works, and a page falls open, as Philip Casey's poem was. So for some reason, there's a sticker in this from an event about 2 years ago, and so I'm just going to read you this poem and see if it goes anywhere. It's called Snowman. No matter that we prayed to God himself, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, as well as half a dozen saints we knew by name and some odd talent or disfigurement, the power to raise the dead, to put out fires with their breath, or balance all night up a pole. The meltdown came. The head was first to go. The belly lost a pound or two, an eye came loose. The carrot nose slipped an inch, then disappeared entirely overnight. Perhaps a rat or early bird had dragged it off. Before we knew it, snowman became snow thing. Stooped and hunched, a drunk in a dirty linen suit, a gate crasher who'd lost his way, forced to spend the night outside alone. Who could love him anymore? Even the crozier that had made him seem so wise last week, our own Saint Patrick, lay now like a question mark at his feet. It's not yet mine, but this book had an interesting genesis, I suppose you'd say, at a festival a couple of years ago with Sandra, who happens to be here, in Cyprus. An interesting kind of idea for the festival was that the invited poets were all asked to visit the website of a museum in Nicosia and to choose an object or objects and write about them. And it was an interesting way to involve at least one local organisation and make some kind of a meaningful bond between the visiting poets and the place and the visiting poets and each other. And it's the kind of little trick that sometimes results in something. But in my case, it opened up a whole part of the last 2 decades for me that I hadn't gone near, in a sense. I'm married to an Italian, a Sicilian from the Greek city of Syracuse, and Cyprus is a Greek-founded culture. And I'd been going for 20 years to Sicily and had written dozens of poems and never published a single one of them. And because I am more aware there that I'm a tourist and just on the surface of the palimpsest history. But for some reason, I knew nothing about Cyprus, and know nothing about Cyprus. But it opened up that space. Ignorance is one of the sources of poetry. So I'll read you the cover version, as you might say. And it's based on these two figures, which are just over 3,000 years old. Stillness. Like two startled meerkats, sensing a predator's approach. The return of the king from some battle. The arrival of his wayward, inquisitive son. Hoping not to be chosen, these two female servants take a deep breath, then stand so utterly still that not only the moment, but the greater part of recorded history passes them by. All the ugly intentions of the world muttering to themselves as they vanish back into the night. And that trigger, normally I suppose, I don't know if this is just of any interest to anybody, but normally when I'd have all sorts of bits lying around, I'd be trying to link them. You think you could link them chronologically, you could link them thematically, and the reason to link them, I think, is that sometimes it gives depth or possibility to things that might have seemed light or even slight. And poems share a common weight. They swap places and they swap responsibilities by being put in each other's company. Something happens. They're not just individual presences anymore. And so normally that would be the process. But I couldn't figure it out. And then I thought of the William Burroughs stroke David Bowie idea, you just fuck it all up in the air. And you see where they land. And I thought, well, that's slightly the other extreme. And then the third possibility seemed to be that you just you listen out for something that tells you when you get to the end of one poem, which other one on the floor should be next. And it's a given in that sense. It's something in the moment. So I'm just going to read you a few of the poems in sequence. You probably won't see what I see, but that's irrelevant. So, Race Meeting, Baldoyle. I live in Baldoyle, and Baldoyle was a very notable racecourse until sometime before I got there. But the remnants of the racecourse is still there. And this is a photograph that's in Baldoyle Library. Race meeting Baldoyle. He smokes. She holds something just below her nose, a sprig of shamrock or wildflower snatched from the roadside somewhere. Something small and fragrant that might lift the spirits on this racecourse day. The bawl of crowds, the thunder of hooves, the scent of horseflesh, and out beyond the endless chugging of backed-up motor cars. What holds the eyes and heart's attention is the quiet that seems to link this pair, as words might do. The echoing postures, his thick cigar, her petalled stem. His solid, gruff uncertainty, her fragile, dreamy elegance and grace. And yes, the one thing that the photographer commemorates, but has no chance of capturing, their breath. And then this third poem is a poem called Unidentified Miracles. And the background to it is there was an anthology produced a number of years ago in the National Gallery of Ireland by a woman called Janet McLean, who I've never met. And she approached a number of poets, a large number of poets, and asked them to choose something from the gallery and write about it. And I chose a picture from the gallery and wrote about it, but never finished the poem. A friend of mine died in the writing of the poem. I got distracted, then some things happened at home, and then it just never got done. And the thing is, the painting, I used to live beside the gallery, so I was often in the gallery. And every time I'd go to see the painting, I was fascinated by it and think, I should have written that poem, right? And years had passed. And while I was not writing the poem, the painting, which is 200 plus years old, the provenance was finally proven. And the painting is now attributed to a painter. So I had started the poem about a painting that nobody knew who it was by and what the miracle described in the poem was, in the painting was. And all of those things had been clarified before the poem was finished. So if you want the job done fast, I'm your man. Don't forget your shovel if you want to go to work. Unidentified miracles. Birds taking off from a roadside bush. Contagion of ecstasy. The dead man my father found, who before the police turned up was back on his feet, ready for another whiskey. And this strange image, 300 years old, of the day I was called by my father out to our long backyard to witness his surprise, and spied in the low steel basin before him, filled to the brim, not the thing he'd been studying and wished now to reveal, a fish, an eel, a hive of fresh-laid frog spawn, but a sky so empty and blue that before I knew it, it was, in its own way too, a kind of miracle. I'll read you a poem called The Big Freeze. Just outside of Portlaoise, where I grew up, and like a lot of IRA prisoners, haven't entirely managed to leave. There's a big house, Emo Court, which was at a stage a Jesuit seminary, and the famous, at least on this island, the famous photographer Father Brown, who took some extraordinary photographs, and thousands of extraordinary photographs. His hit rate, his success rate was just phenomenal. He was a seminarian himself there, and he took a number of famous photographs of the lake frozen over and the Jesuit seminarians all out skating. It's quite fantastic, and Bruegel, you instantly see Bruegel in it. But then there's one individual, there's one of the photographs where it's just one individual Jesuit, and he has taken off his coat and he has it on the ground and he's skating around it like that. Sorry, can you see that? Right, okay. The thing that helps to know is that when the house passed from Jesuit hands, it passed into the ownership of an Englishman who moved to Ireland, wealthy. I think he was a supermarket owner, industrialist at a stage. And when he's now deceased, but when he got very old, he passed the house into to the state on the condition that he'd be left to live out his days there. And when he originally took the house, the lake was very overgrown. It was reeded and it was, sedged, I suppose. So it had to be dredged and cleaned out. And in the process, they found a number of complete and partial statues of mythological characters, all of them female, all of them in various states, as in the olden days, I won't be around for them, of undress. And these had obviously offended the sensitivities and sensibilities of our Jesuit brethren, which is why they ended up in the lake. The big freeze. No one who has seen them will forget the Jesuit novices out skating on the ice of Emo Lake. That simple alphabet of familiar poses: caution, doubt, surprise. How they called to mind the elder Bruegel's sympathetic portraits of skating peasantry in some tiny Flemish town, as the so-called Middle Ages come to a close and this present enlightened age of ours began. And of course, we have to love its innocence. This dreamlike masterpiece of Father Brown. But my eye is drawn to something more intense, more telling. It is winter 1938, and as Europe begins to brace itself for war, out on the ice ventures Leonard Shiel, S.J., unseen but by the unseen photographer. And out there he demonstrates a bracket turn, an arabesque, a perfect pirouette. The bulk of his discarded great coat ominous as a body by his feet. Strange it could be so much colder then. The trees not merely bare but skeletal. The sky a bruise of greys. And the lake itself alien, if at the same time magical, scarred by the skater's blades as he goes, unheeding of creaks or groans, or the gentle rise of pockets of trapped air from deep below, the breath of the goddess marbling the ice. I forgot to look at the clock, so Pat, it's up to you to try and get. I'm saying trying to get me off the stage.
I'm afraid my croziers.
The crozier.
Crook doesn't reach this far.
Every festival should have a crozier for that purpose. Okay. I was in Cork at the Winter Warmer Festival, and I finished this poem the day I read it. And I don't think I read it very well, so I'm going to read it again. It's called Robert, and it's about when I moved to Dublin first in the 80s, in the house I was living in bedsits, in the bedsit next door to me, there was a chap called Robert, and Robert, like myself, he was a bit younger than me, but Robert also wrote poems, and I thought his poems were shite. Right? I mean, I did. But I really liked him. And that was a negotiation that had to be done every time. I didn't think I was particularly good, let me tell you. That's not it, but it was still a negotiation. Every time we had to kind of get past it. And he would come and he'd knock on my door and he'd find an excuse to talk, and we had a friendship, a relationship. And then I moved out, and I hear of him every now and then. And in fact, he let somebody know to let me know that he was photocopying his poems in little kind of pamphlets and leaving them in the National Library. And I checked in the National Library recently, 25 years later, and they're all there. They're all referenced. It's so fantastic. Some librarian had indulged him. I just called the poem Robert because I don't want to be unkind to him. It's not meant to be unkind. But what really, the reason I'm saying this, what moves me still about thinking about it is that you often imagine that it's the glorious and wonderful writers, and I'm going to include people like Tom Lynch in this, that have kept you interested or have inspired you or whatever. But actually sometimes it's a whole lot of other people as well. You think, what was it about him? And it's much more complicated where poems come from and how you end up being the one who's alive a little bit longer and what your responsibilities are to others. It's about responsibility, I suppose. Robert. When I heard he was dead, my once neighbour and friend Robert found, so they said, no, not drowned as I guessed. More than once he had gone to the shore on his own late at night, but instead, in a press, a wardrobe, with his belt round his neck. I was back in my room next to his in that damp, grimy house where we lived. Long ago, would-be scribes, side by side, and he'd knock rat-a-tat, now and then, on the pretext or need of some milk or a pen, to stand then in the door, that warm smile and a half cigarette on his lips, saying this, did he say it back then? He for sure says it now. Thanks I owe you, we poets must stand each for each, must look out for each other, be twice what we are on our own, to be whole, in just words and short lines, in small rooms, though no joke, all we have to survive. I've never read most of this, and but anyway, that's the way new books are, isn't it? So just forgive me. So I have no idea where I'm going. I'll read you this poem called Prayer for a Grieving Sister. God, I can't even send this poem to the person it's about, because it would be too much. What happened is this good friend of mine died young and suddenly, away from home, and his death completely destroyed his sister. And for a while we stayed in touch about him, and then I couldn't take it anymore. I felt that I was bringing it back to her, that my communication, my desire to empathise, to offer humour, some kind of salve, I was fucking making it worse. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get past grieving for her, grieving for him. Are you with me?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that. Anyway, that's what it is. And there's a fact in it
Pat,
which, yeah.
For Jessica's sake, now my crow's ear is reaching out to me.
Okay, so I'll read it fast. Okay. And I won't read it. I'll let you think about it. No, I'll read it. Okay, I'll read it. Okay.
As quick as you can.
All right, quick as I can. But the one thing you need to know, and this is the terrible part of it. I didn't tell you we were going to entertain you, right? But the terrible part of it is, I hesitate saying this, because this is like Robert. I'm in the business of open secrets about myself and about other people. That's just what I seem to be interested in. Is that she lives in sight of his headstone. I'm talking in sight of his headstone. If you open the door, it's there. Prayer for a grieving sister. Thanks for listening. I don't know what I'm talking about, but thanks for listening. Your death's undone her, as if she were a thing of air and look, and now she can't let go, your sister, or step away. She can't move on. And these spring nights, like all the winter nights before them, you hear her turn the key and slow as a funeral procession. Wander off she knows not where, soft or hard rain falling on her skin, her shadow lengthening, then vanishing as darkness takes her back to sit in silence by your grave. The grave the cruel gods have dug just yards from home. 2 years you're gone already, and free of all we cling to here, these lengthening evenings, laughter, drink, the dance of music on the breeze. If you can bear to sense or feel something of her pain, reach down, lost brother. Touch her face. Send a sign she'll know has come from you alone, a tune in the air, your whistling signature. Then take her hand and hold it. As only you can do, lead her out of this dark shadow world that she might live again. Her breath, her own, her heart set free once more. Her rigor mortis grip on grief released. Amen.
Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? Great. And also thank you to Pat Cotter for continuing to arrange this fantastic festival. I think, you know, in a country where we mostly memorialise or celebrate our poets when they're safely dead by putting them on tea towels, this is one of the too few places where lively and living poets can come together. And in honour of that, I'm going to start with the first poem in my new collection, The Quick, which is called The Life. Halfway across the Hogarth Road, the life flew out of me, pitched itself into the dusk. What grip did I loosen to let it go? What shape was out there speaking for me, picking up my stitches, finding my lost loves, lying down soft beside them in the dark? Watching it go was a gift sudden as rain on a sweltering night. And when it came back, cool wanderer, pressing through my skin, I knew I had been lessened, that I was somehow more alone than when I had been divisible. So this is a book which is kind of concerned with a number of different hauntings and dialogues with the dead. Now, not necessarily in a morbid way, I hope, but more in a sense that at the moment we might be interested in what the dead might have to say to us. And the next poem I'm going to read is inspired by the Citizens' Assembly, which took place a couple of years ago now. For those of you not from Ireland, it was an incident when we were coming up to our referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment, where the government, our Fine Gael government at the moment, thought they might kick the can down the road by farming out all of the debate on the subject to this kind of assembly of Citizens' Assembly, a bunch of people who've been brought together. And it was a slightly unnerving moment, I think, for many of us. But what actually ended up happening was that the Citizens' Assembly were not half as conservative as I think the Fine Gael government thought they might be. But the whole thing got me thinking really, I suppose, about constitutions and how in their worst form or in their most negative sense they can often confer voting rights on the dead. Citizens' Assembly. We called a meeting with the Catholic dead. Got little sense from them, but it had to be done. One woman in mob cap and woolen shawl ranted about peelers, the price of flour. A bewigged man condemned the whoredom that had left him poxed. A fat man took an apoplexy over women's rights, died all over again, while wan adolescents thronged the back, coughing blood. A lechery of priests were first to comment. McQuaid in scarlet stepped forward to speak for us all, owned they could not agree on anything except that no decision should be made without the input of all the faithful departed. Life is too serious a business for those with eyes clouded by a future. I was in Bath Cathedral about 2 years ago for a weird little flying work trip. I was seeing some theatre there, and I had one of those kind of glorious afternoons where I really should have been answering emails on my iPhone, but instead I was wandering around the Roman baths and in Bath Cathedral. And the first line of this poem is an inscription from a gravestone set into the nave there. In Bath Cathedral. O reader, stay one moment with the dead. Our bones are mingling beneath your feet, and we are all alone. Stay with us while our knuckles roll amongst pence and relics, over curses scratched on tin or silver to hex a neighbour for a stolen blanket. All the company we have now is Minerva's stone head that never suffered joy or entropy. Her brow smooth while all around us hot spring water picks holes in bones. Stay through days of rotting joists, through bombs that make the air sing with flying glass. Stay though the nave is scattered with broken saints. Stay and hear and remember. Our echoes chime around the world. They sound through the breath of others, in unimagined deserts and cities, in Damascus, in Aleppo, in Palmyra. Stay and hold vigil. The dead are all the same. I am very interested in the Hamelin myth, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. It's actually, I wrote a poem responding to it in my first collection, and I found myself drawn back to it again recently, especially during the migrant crisis, because the thought struck me what might happen if the children of Hamelin were to reappear in the Europe of today. Calais. They came back, you know, the children of Hamelin, miles from where they'd disappeared, with the worn air of those who'd walked too long, whose limbs had knit to rope from hunger and great distance. At first we caught glimpses, a face at the crowd's edge, a figure at the campfire standing just beyond the reach of light, dun rags in the ranks of knock-off Western sportswear. And when we tried to catch them, a strange thing happened. The faces in the crowd merged until the migrants began to look just like the children, wolf-like, hollowed, their eyes all making the same accusation. When the camp went up in flames, we saw them clearly standing grouped among the burning tents, their revenant gaze, their question, where is home? I'm going to read a poem from my dad, who had a kind of a sudden serious illness a couple of years ago and has recovered very well, but it was a really frightening time. While he was ill, they put him on huge amounts of steroids, which is something that some of you may have experienced, or you may have experienced relatives who've been given these huge doses of steroids, and they can have a really horrible effect on people, I mean, almost causing hallucinations. And my dad is the kind of man who, for his entire life, has never been a great lover of literature, but has never been able to recall a line of a poem, or indeed find his car keys, or, you know, he's the kind of man who'd be tearing the house apart and we'd be going, Dad, they're in your hand. But while on these huge doses of steroids, we came into the hospital to find him reciting Byron's The Destruction of Sennacherib in its entirety, which is probably one of the most chilling things that's ever happened. Nimrud. When recovering in hospital, the steroids mutated the radio's talk of beheadings in Nimrud to a dirge in your ear, till the words you learned as a child poured from you. The Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold, Byron's rhythms beating drums in your veins. You were never one to remember a poem, but in that ward it infected you. We tried to laugh the possession away as the radio sang of black-clad men blasting their marks on ruins, pulling wings from the Sphinx, slashing its sightless eyes, only to succeed in redacting themselves, much as the words of the poem fell away from you when we took you home. A little Cork poem. Perseids. On Camden Quay, a mother and her sons stare into the night. I join them, look out over the lea at the milk-swollen moon, seek meteors among the clouds that catch the city's excess glow. The one flicker I see, a plane, but the boy's face is still upturned, and though the light from whatever star he saw has vanished in clouds, or perhaps from the universe long before he set eyes on it, he grips his mother's hand, his star caught in the dark of his pupil. I was commissioned to write a series of poems in response to Swift's modest proposal back in 2016, and the prompt I was given was, what might Swift be incensed by now? What might he be driving him towards this particularly kind of gruesome and grotesque brand of satire? And for about 10 minutes I was really worried, oh God, what am I going to write about? And then 2016 did not disappoint. So it's a long sequence of poems, but I'm just going to read the opening section, which deals with the idea of hiraeth. I always think I'm probably pronouncing it wrong if there's any Welsh speakers in the audience, but it's just a word that means nostalgia for a homeland that never was, and I think we can find a number of applications for that in contemporary society. And I actually wrote this in Manchester 2 days after Brexit, and 2 days before Brexit I'd been in Covent Garden having tea with the playwright, and everybody in the little cafe around us was saying Brexit is never going to happen. And 2 days afterwards I was being driven into Manchester city centre by a Somalian taxi driver who said of course Brexit was going to happen. So, I could name a country, and by naming it, bring it into being, a country not unlike ours. Driving on a summer evening, you might see the froth of elderflower, the shadows cast by chestnut trees that beckon memories of youth, or hear a voice in the distance calling you home for dinner. You might feel the heat in the earth tingle up through your feet, and with it the sense that if you move, the evening will be lost. But in this country that I name, as you try to pin that feeling to one memory or another, you might notice the shadow's stillness. And yes, it is true that in my country the sun never sets, but burns on the horizon, tarnishing the evening to old electro-plated silver. If you were to go there with me, we would stop the car among those elderflower hedges, and I would take your hand, guide you to where you might hear the long-lost music of your mother's voice calling you home across the fields. And I'm going to finish with 3 very short poems I was always told never to say that, I'm going to finish with 18 more poems. They're 3 very short poems from a sequence called Witches, which is inspired, I suppose, by the generation of my mother's and my aunts. So these were women who would have been born in the 40s, 50s, up into the 60s, many of whom would have been intelligent, ambitious, creative women, but in my family at least really the option was maybe you finish secondary school and you go and work in a factory for a while and then you get married. Really, I remember the kind of the destructive nature of that creativity turned inwards, how it kind of creates its own little dark matter engine. So these poems are kind of inspired by that dynamic, you know, how woman's inhumanity to woman under the patriarchal system, but they're more crack than that makes it sound. And the first one I'm going to read is inspired by the divorce referendum. I do love a good referendum. Specifically my memory of it as a child, and the notion that the anti-divorce people said, "Sure, you can't let this happen. Every woman in Ireland will leave her husband." And the pro-divorce side said, "That's ridiculous. Sure, they all love their husbands." And every single one of my 6 aunties left her husband as soon as the divorce came through. Just for the novelty, for the crack. So this first one is called The Witch's Love Song to Her Ex. You're a punch bag, a suit stuffed with duck down, a helium balloon in a furnace, but still you trip about forgetting your vitamins. A pint is not a meal. And between your pratfalls, lost jobs, unpaid loans, there are those tar pits we all tiptoe around, the abandoned wives, the children no one mentions, because tar sticks and we don't like the look of your filthy shoes. You're a lamp riot, an ice cube on a stove, an unattended chip pan spitting your gold into our faces, and oh, how it burns our eyes, but we hide it in the tiny pockets of silence that line our clothes, that keep us afloat in dark water when we drag you, yet again, towards the shore. And though your warehouse is bare, we are out here waiting, we fixers of men, to greet each arsehole with a toothy kiss, to pull the stones from your pockets, replace them with cups of tea that scald your balls as they spill, and to stop your mouth with slices of cake as we wrap 100 scars around your neck and wind until you find you're choking. And isn't it only what's best for you? And doesn't it serve you right? The witches demonstrate how best to catch a rabbit. Wait until the poachers have it gutted, spitted, sizzling, until they're lulled by the patter of fat on the fire. Then creep out of the trees, careful that the moonlight doesn't catch the bowie blade you've graced and wetted. The night may be cold, thermals are advisable. Then grab a poacher by his cock and bring the knife up beneath it. Threaten to hack it root and branch so that he'll bleed out in the darkness with no ear to catch his frantic prayers. Then take your rabbit, run. And then finally I'll finish with a curse poem, a hex poem, for which I take no personal responsibility, and any blame really should be pointed in Pat's direction for publishing it in this lovely book. And this is called The Witch's Hex Anemone. May the jelly in your eyes be eaten by eels. May your guts grow fins and escape out of your arse. May the springs of your bed slice your back like rusted knives. May boils fester your balls. May sleep desert you. May you not have 1 second of ease. May the closing of an eyelid be a scalpel to your retina. May your enemies shit on your grave till it becomes a blackened monument. This we wish on you with the power of our mothers, our grandmothers, all our sainted aunts, God help you, and with the unformed id of our gestating daughters, whose vision is nightmare, whose magic is cellular, whose name is splinter, shank, scrawl. Thank you.
There's a sense that being a poet is kind of a chronic condition. Sort of, I forget now the person who said it, but they said there's easier ways to die of hunger. Not so much as a reader, because you've both made huge space in your life for poetry, but the sense that when did it grab you by the hand and sort of not let go when you thought, I certainly feel anyway there's no way back. So for you both, when did you sort of, how did it come about? You said, yeah, I have this space, this is who I am.
I suppose for me, to kind of go back to the women in my family, my grandmother, after she had her 7 kids, would have been, I think, the first woman in Ireland to go and graduate from the Central School of Speech and Drama. and then she went and taught speech and drama in a lot of the inner city schools in Dublin. And she just, her house was full of speech and drama primers, which even by the time I came along, she was born in 1916 and I was the youngest child of the youngest child. They were kind of an outdated concept in a way, but I just remember that poem, Antigonish. I do not like thee, Dr. Fell, the reason why I can't, and I paraphrase it every time. And I just thought, and there was another little rhyme yesterday upon the stair. I met a man who wasn't there, he wasn't there again today, I wish that man would go away. Terrifying, really, really dark stuff, but there was kind of a sense of a secret language there, a kind of an allegory or a symbolism that pointed to something just kind of beyond the real and beyond the mundane. And there was a slight tinge of kind of fear to that, as if when you crossed that threshold, you didn't really know where you might find yourself. But I think that kind of sense of excitement about language and its possibilities and how something very deep can be hidden under the surface of something very simple. I think that's what first grabbed me, and that's really what still kind of keeps me writing. Yeah.
Does the mic work?
It probably does, yeah. But I don't need it until I have something to say.
All right, okay.
Which is unusual for me. I don't know what to answer. I was saying in the workshop today that one of my favourite lines of poetry is "The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream," and that's the only thing that's in my mind at the minute. And I'm thinking why. And I think part of the reason is that I was a busker for years. When I left school, I used to play and sing badly on the street. I made a better living than I do now, I can tell you. But it was always the sound of it I was interested in, and the only emperor, the emperor of ice cream, sounds important to me, and so that's always it. So I'm always attracted to things I like the sound of, and most of my music collection is in languages I don't speak, and so I have to hear things to know if they're true, and if someone's lying to me, I know. In any language, I know. And if someone is revealing themselves to me, I know. And if someone is trying to impress me, I know. I can see through it. So it's always to me the ear. So therefore I suspect, but I don't know, it could be romantic, that it goes back to the first seed planted when somebody, my mother or my older sister, or someone read to me, or spoke, or imagined stories to me as a kid, and that in intimacy, that's what I want, and I maybe I'm lonely, maybe but I want the intimacy, and I don't run from the ideas, but it's not the ideas that bring me to a poem, my own or someone else's.
You had a line in your poem about being twice what we are.
Say what?
Is it to be twice what we are?
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing, because the experience when you write it down or when you hear it is not the experience. It is a parallel. So I used to have this hatred of the idea that poets were hiding things in poems, and you had to get a fucking chisel, go looking for it. Instead, it's all running in the peripheral vision, and there's someone changing those points, and the train goes that way, that it's go, and you see stuff out windows all the time. Does that make any sense? Yeah, okay.
They're both really sharp and fierce. I just wanted to, if we have time, we have maybe 2 minutes. No pressure, but it's hard enough when you make the decision, this is what I'm going to do with my time and my life. How then do you both negotiate sort of making time for editing and being with other people's work in the world, and is that something that is necessary to your own writing, or is it just fun, or just what's your relationship to it? Because so to put it in context, you're an editor for many years and publisher, and you are editing an anthology at the moment. So.
Yeah, I mean, I often think that for me, you know, to have a full 8-hour day to work on something creative would be the death of creativity for me. So I work full time in a museum, and then I also take on a lot of different freelance gigs, and then somewhere I have a time machine which I use around the house and find again, and manage to find time to do a bit of writing. But I actually kind of love the stolen moments that I have to dedicate to poetry. And I find, you know, places like writers' retreats, like the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, are great when you have a kind of an editing project where you have to sit down. But the creative moments for me are kind of the moments on the bus, or the moments when I know I should be concentrating on something else, or that moment where you wake up at 6 in the morning, there's something going round and round your head that needs to be kind of, that needs to form, you know, that needs time to form. Yeah, exactly. The kind of subconscious bubbling away in the background, trying to, you know, chuck ideas at you, about 10% of which are decent and the rest of which are utter nonsense. But yeah, I think, you know, in a way, and the busyness for me, I think enhances the quality of my concentration. At the moment, that's what I'm telling myself to avoid nervous breakdown status.
Oh yeah, I'm an obsessive. Thank you for your sympathies. No, but I am. So if I have a day off, I end up. I've never had a day off in a long time. Because if I'm not working on someone else's work, which I am every single day, Christmas Day included, the minute I stop, then I start doing something else on my own work or somebody else's work, or I can't. I won't say I can't get enough of it because I have too much of it. But I don't know what else. I don't know what else one does. But the way I survive, the way I manage to deal with it, is that I don't just do it sitting at a desk. I think that's murder. I think that, you know, so I've had to find a way to make the various parts of the process portable, mobile. So I bring them with me. I write into a dictaphone. I write on walls, spray can. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I remember things. When I go for long walks, I bring people's books and I memorise their poems on the walk. The first time I met, God love him, Philip Casey, I scared the hell out of him because he introduced himself to me by name and I immediately recited one of his poems to him, and he was on crutches, but if he could have, he would have run. You know what I mean? I've always been obsessive. It's just, you know, everything by multiplied. It's tiring, but it's great. And there's no musician I know who isn't like this. Yeah. So I'm just surprised that other people are not like it. Do you know what I mean? That other makers. Yeah. And you know, some people say it's terrible that there's no audience for poetry. There is. There's a huge audience. Now it happens an awful lot of them are also makers. But who would say that at a fesh? That it's terrible there's no audience if everybody in the room is all playing Rual's Limerick. It's great. You know? So it is just, it's how you see this thing. It is a process, and you enter into it. And you surrender into it as well, you know.
That's a beautiful line to finish on. And the guys' books are on sale outside, and thank you for your attention, and thank you to the
That's right.